My name is Emory, and just yesterday, I thought my life was as steady as it could be. I had what most people would consider a good life. A cozy home, a stable job, and a wife I adored. But in a single evening, everything shifted, and now I'm left trying to make sense of it all. Celine and I have been married for 9 years. She's always been the lively one, the kind of person who could brighten up any room she walked into. I've always admired her energy, her drive, and the way she seemed to navigate life with confidence. But over the past few weeks, something had felt different. Not anything I could point to outright, but little things that added up, like the way her phone seemed glued to her hand, or how she'd laugh less at my jokes and more at whatever she was reading on her screen. About a week ago, she told me she had a business trip coming up. Celine works as an event coordinator, so travel isn't unusual for her. First, I didn't think much of it. But looking back, there were signs I should have noticed. She seemed almost overly enthusiastic about the trip, planning her outfits days in advance, humming little tunes as she packed. Normally, she's not a fan of travel, often complaining about the hassle of airports and hotels. This time, though, she seemed excited. The morning she left, I kissed her goodbye as usual. She gave me a big, bright smile and told me not to worry. She'd only be gone for a few days. I watched her drive off, feeling a strange pang in my chest that I couldn't explain. Maybe it was just me being overly sensitive, but something about the whole situation didn't sit right. During the 4 days she was gone, we stayed in touch. She called me every evening, just like she always does on trips. But our conversations felt empty. She'd tell me about meetings and networking events, but there was something missing in her voice. Felt rehearsed, like she was reciting a script. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was overthinking it. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. When she came back, she walked through the door with the biggest smile on her face. She was practically glowing as she set her suitcase down and stretched her arms out for a hug. "I missed you," she said cheerfully, pulling me in tightly. For a moment, I felt foolish for all the doubts I'd had. Maybe I'd just been projecting my insecurities onto her. But then, as I helped her unpack, something happened that froze me in place. I opened her suitcase to help with her clothes, and there, sitting on top of her neatly folded blouses, was a small, crumpled receipt. It wasn't just any receipt. It was from a high-end spa in a city she hadn't mentioned visiting. My stomach churned as I scanned the details. 2 people, a couple's massage, and a date that didn't match her meeting schedule. I froze. My heart raced as I turned to her. She was still smiling, but when she noticed the receipt in my hand, her expression faltered for just a second. It was subtle, but enough for me to know. In that moment, her glowing joy turned into something else entirely. Panic. The room fell into a suffocating silence as I stood there, clutching the receipt. My hands trembled slightly, but I didn't let go of it. I looked up at Celine, who had gone from radiating confidence to shifting uncomfortably under my gaze. Her eyes darted to the receipt in my hand, then back to me. For the first time in years, I saw something unfamiliar in her expression. Fear. "What's this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the knot in my stomach was tightening with every passing second. Celine's smile returned, but it was forced now, brittle, as if she thought she could plaster it on and everything would go back to normal. "Oh, it's nothing," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Probably something I picked up by mistake. You know how receipts just pile up when you travel." Her explanation didn't sit right with me. I stared at the receipt again, my eyes scanning the details over and over. A couple's massage? 2 people? My throat felt dry as I forced myself to speak. "Celine, this says it's from a spa in Charleston. You told me you were in Atlanta the whole time." There it was, her first slip. Her eyes widened for just a fraction of a second before she quickly recovered. "Oh, right," she stammered, waving her hand dismissively. "I had a free afternoon, so I took a drive. I thought I mentioned that. Did I forget? It was just a quick trip. You know how I love Charleston." I nodded slowly, but my mind was racing. Celine never took spontaneous trips, especially not during work travel. She was a planner to her core, someone who stuck to itineraries and spreadsheets like they were gospel. This wasn't adding up. I decided to test the waters to see how deep this rabbit hole went. "You didn't mention it, but it's fine," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Who'd you go with?" "A coworker." Her answer came too quickly. "Yes, coworker. Sarah from marketing. She wanted to check out the spa, and I thought, why not? We barely had time to relax during the trip, so it was nice to unwind a bit." The lie was so smooth, so effortless, that for a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But then I remembered something. Celine had complained about Sarah just 2 weeks ago, calling her insufferable and a pain to work with. Why would she suddenly be spending her free time with her? The pit in my stomach grew. I didn't push further, at least not yet. Instead, I set the receipt down on the counter and pretended to let it go. "Okay," I said softly, forcing a smile. "That makes sense. I'm glad you got some time to relax." Celine visibly relaxed, her shoulders loosening as she picked up her suitcase again. "It was really nothing," she said, heading toward the bedroom. "I'll put this stuff away and get started on dinner. I missed your cooking while I was gone." I followed her to the bedroom, my mind swirling with doubts and suspicions. As she unpacked, I couldn't help but notice how carefully she avoided looking at the receipt again. It was like she thought ignoring it would erase it from existence. That night, as we sat down for dinner, I couldn't stop analyzing every word she said, every expression on her face. She chatted about her trip, about the meetings she had, the people she met, but it all felt rehearsed, like she was reading from a script she'd practiced in the mirror. I barely tasted the food as I nodded along, offering the occasional aha or wow to keep up appearances. But inside I was making a plan. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from Celine, not directly, at least. Later that night, when she went to bed, I stayed up. I told her I needed to finish some work, but the truth was, I couldn't sleep even if I wanted to. My thoughts were racing, piecing together every odd detail from the past few weeks. Her sudden excitement about the trip, the extra time she spent packing, the receipt, and now her smooth excuses. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I was too afraid to finish. As I sat there in the dim light of my laptop, I made a decision. I couldn't just let this go. If there was nothing to hide, I'd prove myself wrong. But if there was more to this than she was letting on, I'd find out. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that crumpled receipt sitting on the counter, mocking me. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who was she with? Why was she lying? Was there even a business trip at all? The uncertainty gnawed at me, and by morning, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Celine woke up cheerful, as if the tension from the night before had never happened. She kissed me on the cheek, made coffee, and started chatting about her plans for the day. She was so relaxed, so normal, that I almost started doubting myself. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe she really had gone to the spa with Sarah, just like she said. But then I caught a glimpse of her phone on the counter. She always kept it close, but lately, it had been practically glued to her hand. Now it just sat there, unlocked, as if daring me to take a closer look. I waited until she went upstairs to shower before I made my move. My heart was pounding as I picked up her phone, half expecting it to vibrate in my hand like it was accusing me of something. Her passcode hadn't changed, which was a small relief. I wasn't ready for the awkward conversation that would follow if she caught me trying to guess it. Once inside, I scrolled through her messages, searching for something, anything, that could explain what was going on. At first, everything seemed normal. Conversations with coworkers, group chats with friends, even a few texts from her mom about an upcoming family dinner. But then I noticed a thread labeled Ashley, New York. Ashley wasn't a name I recognized. Celine had never mentioned anyone by that name before, and the area code wasn't from New York. My hands trembled as I opened the chat. What I found made my stomach drop. The messages were playful, flirty, even intimate. There were inside jokes I didn't understand, compliments that felt far too personal to come from a coworker, and photos, selfies of Celine from her trip. They weren't explicit, but there was something about her expressions in them, something so different from the woman I thought I knew. My chest tightened as I scrolled further back in the conversation. That's when I saw it. A photo of a fancy dinner for two, with a caption from Celine that read, "Best company, best night. Can't wait for tomorrow." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. She had sent that message the second night of her business trip. The same night she'd called me to say she was exhausted from meetings and going to bed early. I didn't know how to process what I was seeing. It was like someone had ripped the ground out from under me. This wasn't just a one-time mistake or an innocent misunderstanding. It was deliberate, planned, and she had been. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, but it did little to lift the heaviness in my chest. Celine moved through the house as if everything was perfectly fine, humming softly as she brewed her coffee. She even flashed me a warm smile as she poured me a cup, acting like the receipt from the night before had never existed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground beneath me was starting to crumble. The same questions circled my mind like vultures. Was I imagining things? Overreacting? Or was this the moment when the life I thought I knew began to fall apart? Celine's phone sat on the counter, its screen dark and unassuming. Normally, she kept it with her at all times, like it was another limb. But this morning, she'd left it there while she went upstairs to get ready. My eyes kept drifting toward it, the temptation to grab it growing stronger with each passing second. I took a deep breath and stood up, my hands slightly shaking as I reached for it. I didn't want to be the kind of person who invaded someone else's privacy, but this nagging doubt was eating me alive. If there was nothing to find, I'd feel like a fool, but at least I'd have my answer. Her phone lit up as I touched it, and I immediately noticed something odd. A notification from a rideshare app caught my eye. "Thank you for your trip to Charleston. Please rate your driver." My pulse quickened. Charleston? She had told me she'd spent her entire trip in Atlanta for work. Why would she have taken a rideshare hours away from where she was supposed to be? I unlocked the phone using her usual passcode, part of me almost hoping it wouldn't work, that there'd be some small obstacle to stop me. But no, it unlocked smoothly, like it wanted me to see what was inside. I opened the rideshare app first, scrolling through her recent trips. Sure enough, there were multiple rides in Charleston all over the city. Restaurants, a hotel, a spa. The timeline didn't match up with what she'd told me. She wasn't attending meetings or staying in conference rooms. She was somewhere else entirely. I put the phone down for a moment, my hands gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. My stomach churned, and my mind raced. This wasn't just a harmless detour or a spur-of-the-moment trip with coworkers. She had planned this. Every ride, every destination, it all felt deliberate. My curiosity turned into dread as I picked up the phone again. This time I went to her photos. At first it was just pictures of food, landmarks, and generic selfies. But then I noticed something odd. One of the selfies showed her sitting in what looked like a luxurious hotel room, holding a glass of wine. She was smiling, but it wasn't the smile I knew. It was softer, more intimate. And in the background, barely visible, was a man's jacket draped over a chair. My chest tightened as I stared at the image. I knew that jacket didn't belong to me. I had never seen it before in my life. Before I could think any further, I heard her footsteps coming down the stairs. I panicked, locking the phone and setting it back on the counter. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought she might hear it. She walked into the kitchen, her hair still damp from the shower, and smiled at me again. "Thinking about making breakfast?" she asked casually, glancing at her phone but not picking it up. Her tone was light, cheerful, like we were just two people enjoying a peaceful morning together. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just figuring out what sounds good," I said, my voice strained. Celine nodded and turned to the fridge, completely unaware of what I had just discovered. But as she moved around the kitchen, laughing softly about something she'd seen online, I felt like I was watching a stranger. For the first time, I realized I didn't know her. Not really. The woman I had married, the life we had built, it was all starting to feel like an illusion. and I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was about to shatter everything. The rest of the morning felt like I was trapped in some bizarre dream. Celine hummed as she flipped pancakes, occasionally glancing out the window at the garden she'd always claimed was her little escape. She was calm, collected, like nothing in the world was wrong. Meanwhile, I sat at the table, barely able to focus on my coffee, let alone eat. My mind was drowning in questions, each one pulling me deeper into doubt. The image of that jacket in the photo kept flashing in my mind. It wasn't mine. That much I knew. But who did it belong to? Why was it there? And why had she lied about her location? I tried to stay composed, to act normal, but every time Celine glanced my way, I felt like she could see right through me. "You're quiet today," she said, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of me. Her tone was light, teasing. "What's on your mind?" I forced a smile. "Just tired, I guess," I replied, hoping my voice sounded steady. "Didn't sleep much last night." She tilted her head, concern flickering across her face. "You should have told me. I'd have stayed up with you," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her touch felt warm, familiar, but it only made the knot in my chest tighten. "Don't worry about it," I said quickly, pulling my hand back to take a sip of coffee. "I'll catch up on sleep tonight." She smiled again, but this time it felt calculated, like she was assessing whether I believed her little act of innocence. And maybe that's what stung the most, that I was starting to see her as someone who could act, someone who could hide the truth behind a smile. After breakfast, Celine said she needed to run errands. She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her purse and phone, and headed out the door with a cheerful, "See you later." As soon as the door closed, I felt a wave of relief. I was alone, and I could finally think clearly. The first thing I did was grab my laptop. I needed to dig deeper, to figure out what had really been going on during her business trip. I started by searching the name of the hotel in Charleston that had appeared on her rideshare history. Sure enough, it was a high-end boutique hotel, the kind of place Celine would never book for herself on a work trip. She always complained about how frugal her company was with travel expenses. I clicked through reviews, photos, anything that could give me a clue. And then I found it, a section on the hotel's website dedicated to special packages for couples. Romantic dinners, spa treatments, private balconies overlooking the city skyline. It was all too perfect, too convenient. My chest tightened as I leaned back in my chair. Was it possible I was wrong? That she had gone to Charleston alone and just treated herself? But then why lie about it? Why say she was in Atlanta the entire time? I decided to check her email next. I knew her password. She'd given it to me years ago when I needed to print something for her. She probably didn't even remember. As I logged in, my heart raced, half expecting to find nothing, to be proven wrong and feel like an idiot. But then I saw it, a confirmation email from the hotel in Charleston. It was dated 3 weeks ago, before she'd even mentioned the trip to me. My stomach churned as I opened it. The reservation was for 4 nights under her name with 2 guests listed. 2 guests. I stared at the screen, the words blurring together as anger and confusion swirled inside me. She hadn't just lied, she'd planned this. Every detail, every excuse, it had all been calculated. And I had been sitting here completely oblivious while she what? Who was the other guest? What was she doing there? The questions burned in my mind, but I had no answers. Not yet. I closed the laptop and leaned forward, resting my head in my hands. I felt like I was suffocating, like the walls of our home, the home we'd built together, were closing in on me. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I knew I couldn't just yet. If I went into this without all the facts, she'd find a way to twist it, to make me feel like I was the one overreacting. No, I needed more. I needed proof. The sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my thoughts. Celine was back, carrying a couple of shopping bags and smiling, as if she didn't have a care in the world. "I picked up a few things for dinner tonight," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "Thought we could do something special. Just the 2 of us." Her words felt like salt in an open wound. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, I felt like I was unraveling. As she unpacked the groceries, laughing about some story she'd heard on the radio, I made a decision. If Celine was hiding something from me, I was going to find out, and I wouldn't stop until I knew the truth. That evening, I sat across from Celine at the dinner table, watching as she swirled her wine in slow, lazy circles. She was in a good mood, too good. She chatted about her day, the people she'd run into, how she was thinking about picking up yoga again. Meanwhile, I was barely holding it together. The email from the hotel was still fresh in my mind. 2 guests. She hadn't just taken a detour. She had gone there with someone, and I was sitting across from her, pretending everything was fine, when deep down, I felt like my whole world was shifting under my feet. Did you hear what I said? Her voice snapped me back to reality. I blinked. Sorry. What? Celine smiled, but there was something behind it, something calculating. I asked if you wanted to do a weekend getaway soon. Just the 2 of us. She took a sip of wine, watching my reaction. I feel like we've both been so busy. It might be nice to reconnect. Reconnect? The irony was almost laughable. I forced myself to nod. Yeah, that sounds good. My voice didn't sound like my own. She reached for my hand across the table, her thumb brushing against my skin. I love you, Emory, she said softly. I looked at her, searching her face for something. Guilt, hesitation, anything that would tell me the truth. But she was unreadable. I love you too, I said, and the words felt like a lie in my own mouth. That night, while she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I needed to know who the other guest was, and there was only one way to find out. I grabbed my phone and opened the email account tied to our joint credit card. Celine never paid close attention to the statements. I was the one who handled the finances. If she had booked something for 2, it would be there. Scrolling through the charges, my stomach twisted. There it was, an expensive dinner for 2, booked in Charleston. A spa package. A boutique clothing store receipt for men's dress shoes. The final charge made my blood run cold. A flower delivery. 1 dozen roses delivered to a hotel room. The sender, Celine. The recipient, Nathan. Nathan. My hands tightened around the phone. I didn't recognize the name, but that didn't matter. Whoever he was, she had bought him flowers. She had been with him. I turned to look at her sleeping face, peaceful and content. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just going to find the truth. I was going to make sure she couldn't lie her way out of it. The next morning, I woke up before Celine. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, my mind churning. Nathan. The name felt foreign and bitter on my tongue. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, how much of my marriage had been a lie? Celine stirred beside me, stretching with a soft sigh. She blinked up at me, smiling sleepily. You're up early. I forced a small smile. Yeah, just couldn't sleep. She reached for me, her fingers brushing against my arm. Still stressed. I nodded, playing along. Something like that. She sat up, running a hand through her hair. Well, maybe tonight I can help you unwind, she murmured playfully, pressing a kiss to my shoulder. I swallowed down the disgust curling in my gut. The thought of her touching me, whispering sweet nothings, while she had been with him, it made my skin crawl. Instead of pulling away, I let her linger, pretending. Yeah, maybe, I said, keeping my voice neutral. She slipped out of bed and went to shower, leaving her phone on the nightstand. My heart pounded. This was my chance. I picked up her phone and unlocked it quickly. My fingers moved with precision, navigating to her messages. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The usual texts with coworkers, family, and friends. But then, buried under a long list of work contacts, I saw it, Nathan. I tapped on the thread. My stomach twisted as I scrolled. Their messages weren't just flirtatious. They were intimate. Miss you already. Can't wait to see you again. Last weekend was perfect. The words burned into my mind like a brand. And then, the final nail in the coffin. Picture. Celine, sitting on a hotel bed in Charleston, wearing nothing but an oversized men's shirt. One that definitely wasn't mine. The caption read, "Woke up thinking about you. Counting the days." I barely had time to react before I heard the water shut off. My heart slammed against my ribs as I locked her phone and placed it back exactly where it had been. Celine walked back into the room, wrapped in a towel, her damp hair cascading over her shoulders. She shot me a smile, completely unaware that her perfect little lie had just been shattered. I looked at her, my emotions a storm beneath my skin, and in that moment I knew this wasn't just about catching her anymore. This was about what I was going to do next. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Every word Celine spoke, every touch she offered, felt like needles against my skin. I had proof now, undeniable, irrefutable proof. But what was I supposed to do with it? I wanted to explode, to scream in her face, to demand to know how long she had been sneaking around behind my back. But I knew better. If I confronted her now, she'd twist the truth, gaslight me, turn herself into the victim. I wasn't giving her that chance. Instead, I played it cool. I went about my day as if nothing had changed. "Want to grab dinner out tonight?" she asked casually while scrolling through her phone. I nearly laughed. Dinner? Like we were just another happy couple with no dark secrets lurking between us? "Actually," I said, keeping my voice even, "I've got some work to catch up on. Maybe another night." She pouted. "You've been so distracted lately." "I know," I said, forcing a sigh. "Just a lot on my mind." She smiled and kissed my cheek. "Let me know if you need anything." I almost recoiled. The audacity. She left for errands in the afternoon, giving me the time I needed. I went straight to my laptop and pulled up our phone records. I needed more than just texts. I needed to know how often she had been in contact with him. My stomach churned as I scrolled. Dozens of calls. Late at night. Early in the morning. Long conversations, some lasting nearly an hour. This wasn't some meaningless fling. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was real. The weight of it hit me like a truck. My marriage was already over. I just hadn't said the words yet. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wasn't going to rush into anything. I needed to be smart. I needed to be careful. I copied everything, the texts, the call logs, even the photo she had sent him. I sent them to a secure email, a place where she couldn't erase the evidence if she ever got suspicious. By the time she came home that evening, I had my mask back on. I smiled. I laughed at her stories. I even sat beside her on the couch like nothing was wrong. But deep down, I was counting the minutes. Because soon, very soon, she was going to realize that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. I had all the proof I needed. The texts, the calls, the hotel stay. Celine had built her entire affair on a mountain of lies, never once considering that I would uncover the truth. But I did. And now I had a choice to make. I could scream, argue, demand answers that wouldn't change anything. Or I could walk away with my dignity intact, leaving her to deal with the mess she created. I chose the second option. That night, as Celine curled up beside me on the couch, pretending everything was fine, I looked at her one last time, memorizing the face of the woman I had once loved. "Celine," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk." She turned to me, her expression shifting slightly, like a part of her knew what was coming. "What's wrong?" she asked, feigning innocence. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside were printed screenshots of everything I had found, the texts, the call logs, the receipt from Charleston, and of course her photo. Her face paled as she opened it, her fingers trembling. She flipped through the evidence in silence, her breathing shallow. "You're lying," she whispered. But there was no fight in her voice, just panic. I shook my head. "I'm not. But you have been. For a long time." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. "I don't need an explanation," I continued, my tone calm. "I don't need excuses. And I don't want to hear how you never meant to hurt me." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight lift from my chest. "I just want my life back." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She knew she had lost. "I'll be moving out tomorrow. I said simply. I already have a place lined up. That was a lie. I hadn't made any arrangements yet. But it didn't matter. I'd sleep in my car if I had to. Anything was better than staying here. Celine reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Emory, please. No, I said firmly. This is done. For the first time since I found out the truth, I felt a sense of peace. Not anger, not betrayal, just relief. I had been drowning in doubt and heartbreak, but now I was free. She sobbed as I stood up, but I didn't stay to comfort her. That night, I packed a bag and walked out of the house we had built together. I didn't look back. The road ahead wasn't easy. The pain didn't disappear overnight. But in the weeks that followed, I realized something. I was happy. Not because of what happened, but because I had chosen myself over someone who never truly valued me. And one day, as I sat in my new apartment, sipping coffee on my balcony, I smiled. For the first time in a long time, the future felt bright.